Nee, nee, sie ist drin.
Achso, das Standbild? Die bewegen sich gar nicht. Nee, ihr schickt uns dann die Fotos? Okay, danke. Die werden sowieso
Wir setzen. Genau, ihr könnt das schon mal setzen.
Very last minute. It's fast schon wie EU to go.
That's a very big screen.
Matt, would you then bring her on? Because I will only say a few minutes. A very warm welcome at this cold Berlin day here in the Henrik Enderlein Forum at the Hertie School. It's great to see many of you here in the forum and a large number also online. And I'm happy to hand over to our co-organizers. Marie Azuelos is Vice President for International Affairs from Sciences Po. And she will also introduce our guest speaker, Garance Pineau. And we will then have a moderated discussion. So, Marie, the floor is yours online from Paris.
Thank you very much, dear Johannes, for this opening word. Madame la conseillère Europe de la Présidence de la République, chère Garance Pineau, dear Johannes Lindner, co-director of the Jacques Delors Centre, dear representatives of the German and French foreign ministers, dear colleagues and partners, and dear students. It is my great pleasure to be connected with you all this morning to introduce today's Pariser Platz Dialogue on European sovereignty with our distinguished guest speaker, Garance Pineau. I'd like to welcome you all to this event, those present on site in Berlin, of course, but also those of you who are joining us online. I want to begin also this brief introduction by expressing my regret that I cannot be present with you in Berlin at the Hertie School today. The Pariser Platz Dialogue is a highly valued platform for us here at Sciences Po. It brings together France, Germany, and European partners to exchange ideas that can contribute to shape the continent's common future. And it is also a vivid expression of the long-standing cooperation between Sciences Po and the Jacques Delors Centre. Thanks, of course, to the continuous support of the German Foreign Office. And we were actually delighted at Sciences Po to host the last Pariser Platz Dialogue event at Sciences Po in Paris last March, with Jörg Kukies, Secretary of State of the German Federal Chancellery, and which was a great success. But today, we are honored to be able to host Garance Pineau, who will discuss President Macron's vision for a stronger and more united Europe. This will be followed by a discussion of some of the key points of the talk led by Johannes Lindner, and the floor will then be open to the audience in the room and online. So you will all be invited to ask questions and engage in discussions with our speaker. So please do not hesitate to use the chat section to ask your questions if you are joining us online today. You're more than welcome to do that. So before we move on to the discussion per se, let me just say a few words, a brief introduction about our speaker today. Garance Pineau currently serves as the Europe advisor to the presidency of the Republic. And prior to that, she was the chief of staff for Clément Beaune, the former minister for Europe. Ms. Pineau also served as the diplomatic advisor to Muriel Pénicaud, former minister of labor. Between 2013 and 2017, she held the position of deputy director of social relations in charge of European and international affairs at the Organization of French Enterprises, so Mouvement des Entreprises de France. And last but not least, Ms. Pineau was appointed very recently, actually only 2 days ago, as the new director of the MEDEF, the main French employers organization, a position that she will take on next November. So, Madame Pineau, thank you very much again for accepting this invitation today. We are all very eager to hear your insights on the European sovereignty and the answering discussions, of course. The floor is yours.
That works? Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Johannes, and thank you, Marie, for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here with you today and eager to the discussion on this, of course, for us, important topic. And I think that I should start with the fact that, to just highlight the fact that the sole fact that we're having this discussion about European sovereignty here in Berlin today with a French representative is maybe an event in itself. Because to be honest, I don't know if you would share this, Johannes and Marie, but basically we would not have had this discussion some months ago, or some years ago, or some months ago, but basically before the beginning of the war in Ukraine. And I would be interested to know why you specifically chose these words, European sovereignty, because as you know, there's a kind of conflict all over Europe over the terminology, and some of our colleagues prefer talking about strategic autonomy, open strategic autonomy, or independence, or other things. So that's, I think, very interesting that you decided to have this discussion on this concept. And of course, indeed, if we do have this discussion today here in Berlin on this, it's because I think it's clearer from the beginning of the war that it's very necessary that we strengthen, again, whatever we call it, the capacity to decide for ourselves as Europeans. So as you know, and maybe we'll discuss this later, Johannes, it's been stated in the vision of President Macron from the very beginning, because he issued this speech called La Sorbonne speech in September 2017, which is a bit kind of our own Bible. And at the time, it was really perceived just as a French fantasy for some years, basically, and I would say until 2022. Some days after the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the French presidency of the EU at the time convened a summit in Versailles with all the leaders, European leaders, where they adopted the Versailles Agenda. I don't know if you heard of this, but basically aiming at reducing strategic dependencies on key areas, basically energy, industry, and defense and security. And to be honest, and that's probably the discussion we will have, massive work has been undertaken on those areas since then, so since March 2022. There are many examples, but basically we've been diversifying our energy sources, and I think it's a very true debate here in Germany to reduce dependencies over Russian gas. We've adopted some industrial policy framework and economic security doctrines as Europeans, which was completely new in the narrative and in the facts. And of course, we've boosted defense industry base as Europeans. So, and so many other topics. So we're not there yet, of course. I'm not saying that everything has been done and we should now put the pens and stop working. There's a long way ahead of us to complete this, I would call it, geopolitical transformation and to make Europe a true sovereign Europe. But again, the war is clearly an accelerating factor in this regard. Before I want to come back to, I think, the four political objectives that we should follow up as of now as Europeans. I think that we should take into consideration three working assumptions. The first one is that Russia, of course, that's maybe obvious in this room, wants to undermine the European security order and will continue to use force if necessary. Over the last 15 years, it has been verified at least 3 times, and we don't have any doubts that Russia will, if needed, will want to verify these facts a 4th time in the near future. And of course, for us, the best way to avoid that is to get prepared for this. The second assumption is that the US will probably get less and less interested in the EU and more in China. That's not something that we want. That's probably not something that we need. But again, that's probably something that we should prepare for as Europeans. And the third factors I wanted to mention, this is a huge topic, so I just want to touch upon it now and not to open this wide discussion, is probably what I could call the erosion of truth, or the multiplication of fake news and everything that basically weakens our democracies, which are built basically on facts and truth. And I think it's a factor because basically it's even what we see at our level, it's more and more difficult to make proper decisions, to explain the merits of our political decisions to people, and to have proper debates in the EU when it's based on non-facts, basically, or on fake news. So I don't have, of course, an obvious answer, but I think it's important to mention that as a factor of weakening of democracy. So what does that mean in concrete terms for the EU? I would say 4 things. The first one is that we need and we must defeat the Russian aggression and make sure that there's no new one. And that means for us, in very concrete terms, that we need to reorganize our armies, reorganize our industries, to have more mass, more stocks, more ability to react quickly, effectively, with the good equipment, of course. Over the last year, we've been lucky to have an American administration on board, basically, and to have some stocks inherited from the Cold War in some member states. I think it would be wise not to count on luck for the next few years, because those 2 factors may be different in the near future. And of course, for us, that means increasing our production capacity in the EU, and that's the debates we're having as Europeans in the Council on defense and security. The second political objective, I think, is that we must make a success of the enlargement of the EU. That's quite simple, basically. The more we are, the more influential we are, the more protective we are, and the more protection we have in the global competition or in the global game. So, of course, that's too simple to say it like this, because enlargement is a complex process. But I think that at our level, we made it clear, first in Bratislava last May, and then in Granada last week, that it's a clear geopolitical objective and imperative, and that we should organize it as quick as possible for the common benefit of us, Europeans, and the candidate countries. So what it means in concrete terms is that we should engage with them, with these candidate countries, to help them going faster toward us, and reform ourselves, the 27, to make sure that, even if I don't really like this expression, but to be fit for this historical enlargement, and maybe the last one of this EU. The third political objective, I only have 4, Johannes, is that we need, I think, to rebalance our industrial and trade relations with partners who have for some of them, very dynamic industrial policies, which is good and legitimate, but also some protectionist practices, which is less so. And of course, that means that we need to get organized again as Europeans to, I was about to use the term fight, but yeah, it's a bit of this fight. For example, the American IRA, which is a massive, which has massive impact over us as Europeans. And that means 2 things. Of course, that means that we need to reindustrialize in the EU, meaning boosting our production capacity, invest massively in innovation and deep tech. And that means that we must work on our economic security doctrine to have more influence, again, over partners in the global game. And we've started to do that with, I think, the appropriate tools that we have as Europeans towards China, for example. And finally, the last objective, it may appear a bit not at the same level, but I think it's very important that we engage a debate in the EU, and we're having this as French and German together, on simplification, implementation, clarification, I would say. Basically, just to sum it up, I think, again, over the last months, we've adopted, and quite quickly as Europeans, the proper legislation, the good frameworks and everything. The difference with the US, for example, is that it's very difficult to get them implemented. Once you have the IRA in the US, you have it, it's in place, and then when you're undertaking, you just have a simple form to fill in, and 3 weeks later, you have your money. In the EU, it will take 4 years. It's an overburden. It's overregulating. So it means, again, not really at the same level of political objective, but I think it's very important that, one, we clarify our responsibilities and we decide as European where we decided to get integrated common rules apply for everyone, and that's clear. And when we decided to leave that to the national level, we also decide to apply national responsibility, which is very confused at the moment in our view. And secondly, we need to have a clear expression, and the President of the Commission started to have this in her last speech, over simplification of rules, over not deregulation, but cutting of red tape and everything. And I think it's very important in the sovereignty perspective. And I think that it gives much credibility to our political decisions, by the way. Just to conclude, I would say that I think we need to get back to very simple facts and truths when it comes to trying to defining our common project, which is the EU, meaning that the union of nations, we're just referring to that, is a strength when it's well organized. And when the EU succeeds, which is not always the case, to strengthen each of our nations without any of them dominating the others, and transform our extraordinary diversity into collective efficiency, then the EU is probably the most political adventure and success of the modern times. And that is what we really put under European sovereignty, because for us, this is the only way, basically, to be really, again, sovereign in the global game. And that will not happen at the national level, so it can only happen at the European level.
Thank you very much for this great introduction. I actually anticipated your reference to what you called the Bible by reading the Sorbonne speech again. And if you want to kind of visibly see the difference between Chancellor Scholz and President Macron, then have a reread of it, or if you haven't read it yet, look at it. You can never imagine that Scholz would give a 12,000 word speech in a German university in the way that President Macron did it in 2017. So it's really full. I'm not sure I call it a Bible, but certainly it's really full of a lot of ideas. And I think one motivation for us to invite you on sovereignty was also to look a bit back on this. And it is quite amazing if you think what he defines there as key pillars of sovereignty, how much Europe has moved in that direction, on the green and digital transition, on the relevance of security, on industrial policy. I mean, you find elements like he calls for a DARPA, so for an innovation fund and an authority managing that. And so you have a lot of in there. And I was struck by one thing, and I wanted to briefly open our conversation on that, by a reference he makes to 2024. He says, by the next legislature, so after 2019 and 24, so in 24, when we have a new Commission, a new European Parliament, there should be two pillars that Europe is built on: the values of democracy and rule of law, and a strong single market as an industrial base. And I think this is, again, extremely topical if you think about it. But at the same time, it also, in a way, shows where we fall short, I would say, in terms of what we've achieved yet. And this is the 2 points I wanted to briefly start with you, and maybe taking the second one, the single market, as the first one. don't you have the feeling that what he called for as an ambitious European program, and you hinted at the fact of the problems that we have with implementation, is one that would require a sort of institutional but also financial capacity that we're not willing to give Europe? I mean, you mentioned trade, but of course the other side of industrial policy is to do industrial policy and have a funding at the European level. And if I see some of the discourse we had, also going into the Hague speech that the president gave in April, what von der Leyen and Thierry Breton said around Christmas, it sounded that there would be something like a sovereignty fund. What we had as a result now of long negotiations or the deliberation is a step. And step, I don't know to what extent you know this, but it's really just a step. It's a very small program that now we've gotten. So in terms of industrial and economic capacity, don't you think that it sounds great to proclaim sovereignty, but a lot of it is done actually via national? And of course, the fear that some of the smaller member states have is that if you do it nationally, it actually doesn't bring the single market together, but actually fragments the single market.
Should I? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you very much for this question, because I think it's at the core of the reflection. Basically, if I want to sum it up very, very simply, there will be no sovereignty if there's no industrial and economic power from Europe. That goes together, you know, and so you can't project yourselves even on the values, and you can't be influential if you don't have the capacity to decide for yourself and for your own employments and everything, and two, economic power to be projected. So that's clear. We've started again, but we need to be lucid. You're right, we're not there yet. Basically, there are two steps. The first one we've started at the end of last year, 2022, after the president went to Washington, D.C., I don't know if you remember that, it was in December, and discovered the IRA. I don't know if the students are familiar with the IRA, but basically that's over $400 billion to be put in the US economy on energy and on clean tech, essentially. And that's a massive killer. That could be a massive killer for the European industry once we are trying to be more sovereign. Exactly. So we started to have this conversation at the EU level to have a industrial policy. And now we have the framework. We have the rules. We have several things. We have something called the Net Zero Industrial Act, which allows clear acceleration of the clean tech deployments in the EU, which is good. We have another legislation about critical material acts to secure, supply from critical material, which is again another very good news, but now it needs to be in place, and that's why this implementation issue is a real one. It's not a sub issue, it's really an issue. And so that was the first thing, and that we've done, and we've done it quickly. What we have not really touched upon yet is the financial issue, which is, of course, at the heart of everything. For obvious reasons that you know, so we can discuss that, but basically it's very difficult after the massive plan that we adopted in 2020, the NGEU, to have a, let's say, proper discussion in the EU on another collective or common financial effort. But that we'll need to have, because otherwise, we will not be in a position to compete. We have the how you call this, the IPSAs, the industrial partnerships, which are very good, again, good tools, even if we can be faster and everything, but it's not enough. We need to over-invest into deep tech, into biotech, into all this, into, of course, artificial intelligence, and we don't have the means today. And you mentioned something which is very true and which is a real worrying factor for us in France. That's the fragmentation of the single market. Because basically what happens, we also negotiated with the Germans, basically, some stated rules a temporary framework to be adopted and to fit the situation we're in. That is in place until the end of this year, which is very good. But of course, I mean, Germany, very good, has some fiscal capacity and fiscal space to invest and to make some undertaking, remaining in Saxony rather than going to Texas, which is very good for you. But the reality is we have some fiscal space too, less than you do, but we still can invest in our own sovereignty. But the vast majority of member states can't just do that. And they can't because we don't have a European common effort on that. So STEP, the idea is to address this particular issue. You are right, we're not there yet. STEP, the proposal of the Commission is 10 billion euros. And of course, as we know, the discussion is starting next Tuesday in Brussels. We will end up, if everything goes well, to 2 or 3 billion euros, not more. So we need, and I think that's a message that we will probably convey in the EU and also in the European campaign that will be starting in the coming months, about the need to massively invest in the EU as Europeans to again compete and remain in the global game. Otherwise, you're just out.
One view that's very prominent here in Berlin is that the discussion on more means at the European level cannot start unless we have an agreement on national fiscal rules. Now, that debate is not easy. The latest is that there seems to be some convergence. Are you hopeful that we will have agreement before Christmas?
Yes, since we agreed on energy last Tuesday, I'm very hopeful on any other topics because that was really the most difficult one. So, but more seriously, I think that there is space in this discussion for common rules and for agreement, of course. I mean, we're not saying, of course, in Germany, Minister Lindner is tougher than many other partners in the discussion, but. Again, I mean, we're not saying that we don't need any common rules and we don't need even some benchmark. What we want is just to have appropriate rules that allow us, again, to have relevant investment in the coming future. Otherwise, the risk is that we have a risk of recession in the EU. And then you have a double bad effect, you know. So you're right, the discussions are very linked, but I think we are in a position, politically and technically, to succeed in this discussion before the end of the year.
I'm sure we'll return to this probably with questions from the audience, but I want to get to the first part of the quote I gave from the Sorbonne speech, which is the values of democracy and rule of law. And you, in your speech, highlighted the importance to be institutional ready for both sides, on the accession countries, but also for the EU itself. But if I look at the readiness of member states to engage in a discussion on treaty reform or institutional reform, there's really a big diversity. What is your view? What would be the sort of key elements of institutional reforms that need to be implemented in order to be ready? And how do you see the likelihood that we advance on that front?
That's a difficult question because it's very wide, basically, and you could talk to 10 different people. They will give you, of course, 10 different answers because it's also very sensitive. Today, I mean, at this stage of reflection and work in Paris, I'm not convinced that the high priority when we talk about how to be fit for enlargement, basically, and welcome some 8-9 new countries, including Ukraine, which is the real issue for us, because the rest is less difficult. So I'm not convinced that the real issue is institutions, because inside the current treaties, we already have many possibilities to adapt, to adjust to this enlargement, and as you know, they will adjust automatically with the enlargement when it comes to the number of seats, to the commissioners, to the seats in the EP and everything. So this is almost automatically. The real issues are values, minorities, readiness on those matters. And of course, financial flaws, which is at the heart of everything. And financial flows will touch upon two main EU policies that we really need to look at. First, of course, the agricultural policy, because Ukraine is a huge agricultural power, and so will have huge impact on all of us. I mean, that will be a clear issue in France. And the second one is the cohesion policy and how we can continue to help current EU countries while opening up to new ones. And so then you have two different answers, two options basically. The first one is to remain with the current EU budget, which, as we know, is very small. It's a bit over 1% of the GDP, which is nothing compared to the US federal budget, for example, which is over 20% of GDP. So, of course, the flows are totally different. So if you want to remain there, that means that basically the current cohesion funds will go to the new members. And that Poland, for example, or Hungary, which today receive massive funds from the EU, will not receive anything anymore. Are they ready for that? And the discussions by the end of the year on enlargement, when it comes to this particular issue, will be interesting to see the readiness of Polish authorities and Hungarian ones to welcome new members. And particularly the Polish when it comes to their political commitment towards Ukraine. Or, second option, we need to change the way we think the financial organization of our union. And of course, I think that we should be doing. So there's an issue over the increase of the current budget, but there's also an issue on how you better mobilize private capital, and this is the whole discussion that we know by heart on CMU and everything, but that should be done now. And I understand there's some openness in Berlin on this, which is good news, to open up this file. And three, investment. How we better use the EIB to go to more risky projects to be financed, because this is a real stream that we basically not use enough. And I mean, there's a clear issue that will be raised at a time or another, I don't know when exactly, on rolling up the common debt at the EU level. Once you, I mean, that's just also a financial question. Once you will be reimbursing the capital, which is not the case at this stage because we will start to reimburse as of 2028. There's a real issue to be responded by the Europeans to know if that's not better to get more money and to have more debt than starting to reimburse something, you know. So, I mean, at a stage or another, this question linked to enlargement will be on the table, and of course, I don't really see how we do that, how we manage this enlargement to accompany all what we need to accompany in this process without opening up widely the financial issues in the EU.
I mean, first of all, it's very interesting that the point that you're making, you're saying, look, maybe it's the policy debates more than the institutional reform, which is a subtle difference to the recommendations of the Franco-German experts. And secondly, your point on that we really have a proper debate on what kind of budget we want as of 28, when the new financial frameworks will need to start and agreed upon. Now, what I'm struck by is the difference between this sort of visionary outlook that you have and the debate that we currently have on the review of the current multi-financial framework, which I think most governments, including the French and the Germans, are more hesitant, and we will probably have a revision mainly for Ukraine. And probably some of the interest payments that will need to be done because NG, Next Generation EU, is more expensive to repay. But what I'm interested is in how do you get in a way from the rather sort of intense distributive debate that we have now to that kind of mobilization of a debate on what really Europe needs in terms of a bigger budget. How do we, and we spoke about visions of the president, so how do you get that?
No, but I mean, the current revision is a mid-review, as you know. And one of the tensions over this discussion comes from the fact that the Commission initially stated that there will be no mid-review.
True.
So that's why that's mainly the reasons why the member states are not happy with that, because they basically decided on top-ups on many topics that were not decided politically, basically. Now, sorry, I don't agree with you on this. Sorry, just to answer two things. I think the real issue will be for the next MFF. So that we'll be starting to discuss in 2025, 26, basically. And that's exactly where we should be clear with our objectives, political objectives, that should be, of course, translated into the budget choices that we'll be making. That's the moment where we do that. So we need to start to do that from now on, so 2024, in the strategic agenda that we'll be deciding at the UCO level, and then, of course, in the messages that we'll be convening in the campaign. Just a word on the current discussion on the budget. I don't think that we'll do only something for Ukraine. I know that's the German perspective and what Berlin says, but I don't think that will happen, because basically, if you say that, so that's very important that we continue to help Ukraine, no doubt about this. So I don't know if it will be 50 billion at the end or more or less, but basically there will be a huge and a massive envelope for them. But if you do that, then you open open-ended discussions with Italians, with the Slovenians, with all the others on migration, on industrial on the step that we, for example, would like to keep even if it's lower. So I think that at the end, it will end up with lower numbers on every top-ups, but each pillar will remain, you will see.
Keep that in mind, your prediction. I would like to open up. I have plenty of more questions, but I think I would like to open up to the audience here. We have the privilege of a lot of students and other members of the political Berlin to be here. We also have online colleagues, but no questions yet. But who wants to be going first? And maybe please briefly introduce yourself, where you're from, in terms of Hertie or elsewhere, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Garance Pineau, Sciences Po alumna, but at the moment, European advisor at BDA, the German counterpart of MEDEF. So my question is also related to companies, of course. How do you assess the role of companies, also in terms of how can they contribute to European sovereignty? And as also referring to, especially to your fourth point on over-regulation and implementation, how can the EU, simplify, at best incentivize the company's contribution to the European sovereignty? Thank you.
Could we maybe collect two, and then you can reply? There was another one there. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Leon Decani. I'm a student here, MIA student, and my question is more, I guess, in the spirit of the speech of the president. So to what end do you think the debate also needs to be a debate about the purpose of the European Union? So the purpose, of course, from the founding being very much on peace and prosperity. And to what extent do you think that this new idea of sovereignty is a new purpose that could then also give motivation for further integration that is so duly needed?
Thank you very much for these two very good questions. So I know very well the BDA, and I think they are much more influential than MEDEF is, and that's partly the reasons why I made this choice to move from a house to the other.
And change this, yeah.
Because I think that the role of companies is just at the heart of everything. I mean, there will be no sovereignty. If you take the three key areas that I stated, energy, industry, defense, that all relates to basically to companies and industry. So there's no sovereignty without industry. that works together, you know. And again, I mean, what I'm doing here, basically in my office, I'm writing speeches, I'm talking to you, and I'm giving ideas to the president, and that's good. But then it has to be implemented by someone, and that's not by me. That's by the companies, the European companies that need to enter into IPSAs between the Germans and the French and the Italians and I don't know who else. That's the defense industry that need to be ramped up and invest for the purposes that we discussed. And that need to create jobs in the EU. The energy sector is just obvious in that perspective. So that's very, very important that they are on board. And that's very important, I think, that the employers' organizations convey these messages. And I think that I will try to do that, better cooperate together. So I think there's a lot of things to be done between the Germans and the French already. But I mean, we need to strengthen this cooperation to convey the right messages to the governments and to the EU. I mean, I'm not talking about you, but I know that the French representatives of the employers are not influential enough. That's very clear. So again, I mean, everything that we can do collectively to help the companies to understand better the stakes, what are stakes, and to act and to. So that's why this agenda of I don't know how you call it. The Germans call that debureaucratization or something.
Entbürokratisierung.
Entbürokratisierung. That's easier. So that's again, that sounds a bit something, but I mean it's very, very important again, because otherwise you really lose credibility in your own political decisions, and this needs to be. Again, for political credibility, only for the president, it needs to be in place. You know, that's not enough to be by the book. It has to be in reality. Otherwise, again, companies will just move to Texas. Where they get the IRS subsidies. Very easy. On your question, difficult but very excellent question, because that's very, very much at the heart of it. I mean, basically there are two ways to respond to the whole debate. Either you say, and of course I will say that President Macron had a huge and very powerful intuition in 2017, and that he was very visionary and he had understood everything before all the others. Obvious. Or you said that we have been lucky, and basically that the war and the pandemic just helped this agenda. But the reality, at the end, is that the world has changed a lot over the last, I don't know when it started, but basically over the last 20, 30 years. And the Europeans took a bit of time to understand that, really. And I think that if we want to be very, again, lucid, we need to recognize that the EU, as it's been built initially, was naive in the world. And we haven't seen that the others were moving very fast and what the Chinese were doing and the kind of American protectionism and everything. So we've been naive and we've been a bit arrogant in addition. So naivety plus arrogance is not a good combination. And that's what we understood a bit radically with the war, unfortunately. That would have been good to understand a bit earlier, but that's the way it is. And I think now it's very clear when we go to the European Council and you discuss with the leaders and our partners. I think now, the narrative has completely changed in Brussels. So I don't think there's naivety anymore. I don't think so. I think there's many questions over the way it works and the way we should behave. And we experience this every day between Paris and Berlin, where we don't have exactly the same perspective over trade, for example, over protectionism, over industrial policy, what it means. But let me give you a very clear example. The Danes. The Danes, they are not known as protectionists in the EU. They're rather very much pro-open trade and very liberal. Even the socialists, which are in place in Copenhagen today. They are rewriting at the moment, their kind of coalition contract. I don't know exactly how they call it in Copenhagen. And if you look at it, you have 10 times the term European industrial policy, which is completely new in their own narrative, because it doesn't exist in a Danish spirit to say and to state that we need to have a European industrial policy. Even industrial policy in itself is weird for them, because state has nothing to do with industry, and basically private and public are completely separated. But in addition, they recognize that we need to have this at the EU level. So I think it's a very good illustration of how the spirit has changed in Brussels, and how Brussels, as a political object, the EU, has realized that it needs to change its own rules internally, again, to remain a global player. That's really what's at stake. And if we had remained as it is today, I think that in the coming years, basically, so no, I will not finish this.
Yeah, okay. No, but if I could take this up, this arrogance and naivety, and you say the sense of urgency is understood. But let's zoom in on a tricky topic, which should be obvious, which is security. And take the discourse we had on industry. Public procurement of defense industry. 500 million was the proposal from the Commission. We've now gone down to 300 million. Super haggling around the fact whether non-EU companies could be part of it or not. French position, no way. Yet others say, look, we cannot just build public procurement that serves the French industry. So, and the frustration that kind of creates, that if push comes to shove, national interests still prevail.
Well, of course, that's not the way we see it. The fact is that we have a defense industry, but we are not alone in the EU, right? What we really have a problem with is to put some European taxpayer money into Israeli or US equipment. So now it depends on the sense of urgency, as you said. If you want to replenish your stocks and your shelves, basically, you need to ramp up the EU industry, because we have the means to do that. Basically, there's no objective reasons to go and buy this equipment to the Americans. Why do that? So for the ammunition on Ukraine, it's a bit of another story, right? But if you think mid-long term, so how basically over the long run you protect yourselves in the context that we described over the weakening of the US and everything, for us, of course, yes, it's very obvious that European industry, and again, it's not a national interest, should be prioritizing the boosting of production.
And how would you sort of deepen the single market of defense industry beyond the French industry? What do you think would be needed in order to Europeanize the industry?
But you have several member states that have a European industry, so they need to be boosted by European money. That's exactly what we are doing. And all the project and the legislation, which are not completely in place yet, that we are discussing in Brussels, aim at this, And so at the end, of course, new production sites and new industries need also to be brought.
Let me open up for another round of questions. I saw a lot of hands. So could you maybe just around there?
Hi, sorry, can you see me? There we go. I'm Kim Tam, I'm a first-year international affairs student. Thank you for being here today. I was wondering, so you highlighted the importance of internal cohesion and also adherence to EU and European core values in your speech, which I very much agree with, in context of European sovereignty. And I was just wondering, in how far does it harm not only European sovereignty, but also EU credibility when EU member states do not adhere by core values, such as, for example, democratic values or freedom of press or things like that, which we have, for example, seen in the case of Hungary, previously also to a certain extent in the case of Poland, hopefully now better with the new government on the horizon. Yeah, that's basically my question. And maybe also, can I just, yeah, thank you. Maybe also in regard to further European integration and the fact that aspiring member states are asked to meet certain requirements, which I agree with, but it might be difficult to convince them of doing so when some EU internal countries are not doing the same.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Ben. I'm also a first-year MIA student, and I just wanted to ask, in addition to like changing for what the budget is for, is there also discussion about changing the duration of the multi-annual financial framework and potentially shortening it to make it more adaptive to maybe current, but also especially future crises that will probably inevitably come up?
Let's collect maybe your question, if you don't mind, please, and then we have another one there.
Hello. Good afternoon. My name is Arthur. I am from the International Affairs also, and my question would be mainly on like the question of the support military question for the budget, which was very central to the discussion. I seen like in the last few months like the support for Ukraine militarily increased, perhaps not much as Ukraine would want, but the general support like for the public for this help decreased a bit. So in general, I would ask what's the position of France, like see in the future, like Germany recently staged a national strategy for security, which is new, and what would France see like in those two big countries in Europe, which is no longer have the United Kingdom? What do you see in the future, like the importance of these industries or other companies like electric vehicles and defense coming to France? And if we could, in this sense, we could see like a future where Europe really begins a new age of an empire, like really to oppose the United States or China, like if in the future we could think about a new French empire.
Okay, final question.
Thank you. So thank you, Mrs. Pineau. My name is Nicolas Teteschen. I'm from the German Council on Foreign Policy, and I have a little question regarding basically strategic culture, the difference between France and Germany. In France, we have like nuclear deterrence, we are very into European sovereignty, we are world power, we have an army going abroad and fighting for French interests. In Germany, it's totally different. They are very into multilateralism, NATO especially, and it leads sometimes to economic interdependences too, as you said, buying US and Israeli equipment, for example. And well, we can see it can be a problem for us as European partners for our European sovereignty and for the plans that we have for future. How, in your opinion, would France do to deal with this difference on strategic preferences for these countries, for example, France and Germany, that have to work together and have such a different strategic thinking? Thank you very much.
I would like to one last question, because from the online audience we also have questions. So one, please, Linda.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to move away from the speaker. So there's one question that you touched upon already, but Sebastian asked, is there now a necessity for more than a common debt that is a fiscal union?
Very good. I know for those of you that had seen the web announcement in German, it said until 1:30, but everyone else got the notification that it will be until when. But given that some of the Germans think it's longer, I would say we'd take another 5 minutes for you to reply to that, if you don't mind. And maybe as a last point, because we haven't really touched upon it, but it follows very nicely from this question of convergence or non-convergence of strategic thinking. You will be going to the Chancellery after this meeting. So what's the mindset with which you're going, and what's your take on not only on Fischbrötchen, because that's the spirit of Hamburg, as the president calls it, but what's your sense for Franco-German relations? There is here, at least, and I think to a certain extent in Paris as well, some critical remarks saying that we're not yet where we should be or could be.
Thanks for the easy question. Well, on values, I think you're very right to put that at the core of the project, of the collective project, and to make the link between how we deal with this at 27 and how we might have more difficulties to deal with this issue when we are enlarged, because of course everything will be more complex, but this issue in particular. I think that over the last years we've managed to have some appropriate tools in the EU to have some leverage over countries that would be, let's say, more reluctant to apply some common rules. And I was trying to refer to that at the end of my introduction when I was saying that wherever we decided to we've chosen integration, some common rules should apply very clearly. So should be no exceptions to that. And that comes from us, of course, for Germany, for Poland, and for Hungary. And as you may know, we are in a difficult discussions with Hungary, who at this stage had a very small amount of the money they're entitled to from, in particular, the Next Gen EU and some other cohesion funds, because we collectively assess that some core values are not respected. So basically, that takes time, but I would say that this works, because the reality, and I'm following this quite closely, is that the Hungarians, just to take this example, do the reforms. You know, they are implementing now the judicial reform. The Polish too, as you may know, the reform is being validated at the Constitutional Tribunal level. So basically, it works. Maybe we could be a bit more efficient when, for example, widening the mandate of this appropriate text. That's probably what we should be doing in the next years. But I think we are in the same spirit. The good spirit. When it comes to the candidates, I would say that, I mean, basically we should probably discuss two different things with them. As you know, when it comes, for example, for Ukraine, we'll have the report of the Commission next on the 8th of November, I think, trying to assess if Ukraine respects the 7 recommendations that have been issued to them. And inside that, of course, you have fight against corruption, rule of law, and everything. So that's clear. That's the prerequisite. And if you don't have this, you can't go on. In addition, I think that we also should have a kind of more strategic discussion with those countries, because the reality is, when we talk about what we're talking here, sovereignty, if they enter and basically they have a totally different foreign policy, I'm referring to Serbia, for example, or a totally different energy policy or industrial policy, we will have a problem. So I think we should conduct in parallel, basically, the discussion with them over the respect of our common values, which is, again, very important, and also a discussion about our common strategic agenda for the future. On the MFF, I think it's part, very quickly, of the reflection we should have. Of course, I mean, we know this debate, and it could be much more, as you say, agile to have a shorter period of time when we call about MFF, because it would allow us not to have creepy midterm reviews that takes us too much debate. So, of course, it's part of the discussion. When it comes, so I'm not sure I got everything from the French Empire question, but basically, just to try to state clear things, we are in a spirit where there's no doubt that, I mean, the support to Ukraine, including equipment, should be as long as it takes, as we say now. So we are having two difficult discussions, to be very honest now. The one that we touched upon on MFF and on the macro financial assistance to Ukraine. That's one. And the second one about what we call the EPF. It's EPF in English? European Peace Facility, over equipment. So it's not easy, because it's a lot of money for ourselves and, I mean, for the member states. But at the end of the day, we'll need to find a way Because again, I was very much referring to my first point, my first political objective. If we don't send the message to Moscow now, in the context where the US is having other worrying, let's say, by supporting Ukraine as needed to end this war, I don't know how, but in the proper manner for Ukraine. If we don't manage to do that, I think the EU will lose a lot of political credibility and all the rest will be weakened. So we need to find a way. I don't know how it's EPF or something else, but we need to find a way. On the common debt, yeah, I think I said quite clearly that that's one option, and that today we're not issuing concrete details over this. I mean, as a French government, but of course I think it will be in all minds in the coming years when we discuss how to deal with the financial flows and enlargement and everything that we discussed. Again, the support to industry, the support to defense, everything. We need more money. That's it. I mean, sorry to say that very simply, but and if we don't have budget, then that's common debt. And on NATO, different strategic thinking, and the French and German relationship in general. So that's, again, probably the most difficult, because on strategic issues, I mean, you're right, we don't have the same perspective. But, I mean, basically the things are changing over just the events, because basically even, I don't know if you read the speech that the president issued in Bratislava in Globsec, where I think the clarification on NATO was important, and it made it clear how, of course, we would have done what we've been doing over the last year without NATO, and NATO is just core. And what we are saying is just we need to develop and strengthen this European pillar inside NATO. So it's not a question of, and you see how basically this war can we say rehabilitated? No? Well, I think you understand what I want to say. NATO at the occasion of the war.
You mean it
validated.
Yeah. Revalidated, and you mean it wasn't brain dead after all?
Exactly. I was referring to that. So now, of course, we will still have discussions about what we mentioned earlier about procurement, because, of course, we see that the Germans are not on the same page on that. So we need to continue talking. There are some other issues where we're not totally there yet. And we had a very good example again this week with the agreement we finally got at the Energy Council on Tuesday. And that was, just let me finish on this, because it was a very interesting discussions, which started at the beginning over the place of nuclear. And as you know, we don't agree at all on the place nuclear energy should have in the decarbonization of European economies. We think that the right debate is low carbon, renewables plus nuclear, and in Germany, they think that gas is fine, basically. I'm a bit oversimplifying the debate. And the discussion started with this, and it was not the question at the end. At the end, it was just a question of competitiveness and how what is perceived here as a kind. No, it's not a question of subsidy. That's the question of competitiveness of nuclear energy, not because it's subsidized. It's not subsidized just because.
Lower energy costs.
Exactly. Could hinder German industry. And that's the whole issue. And that was very interesting, because that's a very political questions between us that probably opens a kind of new chapter of discussions on how we cooperate in that field. And basically, what is our vision? Do we think that we should be competitors between France and Germany? Or do we think that we should be together and that our competitors are basically outside the EU? Because what I think is very clear, when I listen to my German counterparts telling me, if you're doing this, basically German industries will leave Hamburg and go to French Moselle, which I don't think will happen. This company leaving Hamburg will go to the US or to some other places in the world, but not in France. That's not true. for a very simple reason. We may have some competitive prices on energy thanks to nuclear, but we have very strong social regulation and some other issues that makes it very clear for German industries and employers that they don't want to come to France. And that's for good or bad reasons. German industry remains much stronger than the French one, even if we are trying, thanks to investment that we are doing recently, to get more competitive, more attractive. But we're not there yet. So basically for us, that's not an issue, and the conversation we need to have now with our German counterparts is exactly this one. Do we cooperate together, basically against the rest of the world, or do we basically decide to not join our forces? And that's exactly what I try to say at the end of my introduction, when I'm saying that if well-organized, union is really our strength.
And I think that's a great conclusion. Garance, thank you very much for the debate, for also facing all these difficult questions. We could continue our discussion here. You will be truly missed at your current job, but at the same time, it's great to see you continuing to work on these issues, and that's especially on the issue of industrial policy. I think there is a big agenda, common agenda, and further discussions. So thank you very much. A big applause from us to you. Let me also quickly thank you, the audience, both online and here in the Henrik Enderlein Forum in Berlin. Let me also quickly thank the team that organized so greatly this event, both here as well as our cooperation partner at Sciences Po, as well as the financing from the Foreign Office. We are having another event early December as part of our flagship event, Pariser Platz Dialogue, which is a public event on Franco-German. Not the Pariser Platz Dialogue, but it has a public element, and for that I would like to invite you. We also have an online form if you want to leave us feedback. And with this, I wish you a great Friday and a good weekend. Thank you very much. Goodbye.